The world's top 100 cities generate more than a third of global GDP, with the top 600 accounting for 60%. The most successful urban centres tend to attract the best companies, the top talent, and the greatest investment because of the right mix of factors that help organisations and people thrive, such as the business environment, human capital, information exchange, and culture. Information and Communications Technology, or ICT, is one of the fastest growing industries that's transforming economies of cities and creating millions of jobs. It's projected that demand for ICT skills will grow by almost 6.5% over the next decade, while office admin jobs will see the biggest drop, down almost a tenth. The world's 2,000 biggest companies invested over $900 billion in digital tech in 2015. Financial technologies such as blockchain are driving growth. Fintech financing rose to almost $30 billion in 2017, with the US, UK and India leading the way. City population density creates especially fertile ground for sharing economy platforms to grow. Their market value topped $4 trillion in 2016. Attracting the best talent is essential for the economy of the future, as skilled people choose locations with the best opportunities for growth. New York has launched a program to attract international entrepreneurs from high-tech industries. It helps them to get work visas and accommodation in exchange for mentoring students and first-time entrepreneurs. Human capital, disruptive technologies, financial and creative industries are significant drivers for city economies. What's the best mix for growth?
Добрый вечер, уважаемые.
Good evening, dear guests. We just on the screen you witnessed the results of Pricewaterhouse survey, which was prepared specifically for this research. Thank you for living to this final stage of our forum. I hope you enjoyed as much as all your guests and speakers. And today we have a very hot subject like startups for the city and the city for startups. Urbantech is a rapidly growing segment of innovative economy. Our colleagues from Innovation Agency, only in Moscow about 50,000 startups are operating now, but frequently growth and development of startups and development of cities are not synchronized, which results in the fact that startups which heavily invested in promotion of their products suddenly face a ban, like we saw, for example, with sharing economy services. Airbnb faced a difficult situation in Japan, where there are restrictions on their, let's say, leasing of electricity scooters. Unfortunately, we don't have our colleague from UDrive, which developed a very interesting service for Muscovites. And now people are discussing a ban of electric scooters in San Francisco. How to synchronize development of startup scenery with the needs of the city. I will say again, there is a certain disbalance here. I represent the IT department. My name is Yelena Novikova. I'm responsible for our department for development of business relations. We made a survey recently, and we asked Muscovites, in their opinion, what sectors should be developed now, where technologies are well developed. Muscovites said that payment sector is well developed, and where they would like technologies to penetrate, they describe social infrastructure and medical sector. We're going to talk about that. All cities take a different route, take a different trajectory in order to support the smart up market. Some people create smart districts. We have a representative of the Tegel project who is going to discuss it in detail. Some people go to development of ecosystems. We're going to have a general director of Tel Aviv Foundation, Hila Oren, and some people arrange hackathons, challenges, This is a Moscow route to a certain extent. Let's first listen to Kirill Lnitsky, head of international projects and IT department head in the Moscow Innovation Agency. What Moscow does to increase the number of startups in our city so the startups find a comfortable environment in the city and do not conflict with the city. You have about 7 minutes for your contribution, then we're going to ask questions. I will be brief then. Innovation Agency of Moscow, which I represent, is a sort of one-stop shopping point for the innovative system of the city.
And it's the sole venue platform to take care of the innovative ecosystem startups and the city. And it is a platform for ensuring the test and ensuring the feedback, and while selecting startups for urban projects. And this is a serious platform which connects the city, the government of Moscow and its projects with startups. And in our activity, we are guided by the framework which subdivides the technologies at the urban level, subdivides them onto different categories. And what are those spheres we try to implement our projects in? I mean, those effective ones and the upcoming ones. The first project presupposes the availability of people, HR, and how do they survive in the digital economy, and how do we train those skills and habits. Nowadays, we are creating a new technological school at the Economic Achievements Center, 38 Pavilion, and we are involving the city in the program of Smart City, also support and accelerate the city entrepreneurs, and indeed this citizens should be a part of the Living Lab. And by the way, the citizens may also be a part of these innovations, express their opinions and consensus, and some potential ideas even on as to what may be done for the city. And the next thing to mention, these are structures and standards, but this is the federal level mostly, that is the country in the country. And there are quite a number of standards and quite a number of statistics accumulated, and it's hard to harmonize these standards and present them onto one platform. And so actually we are talking about the organizational chart being digitized, and some cities have chief innovation officers as a job, and this person is in charge for the interaction with infrastructure. But the curator of our complex, Mrs. Sergonina, and the agency is her structural instrument in order to implement the innovative agenda. And here we have to make standards and technologies for smart city universal and uniform, and harmonize them further and make them plug and play, make them interchangeable. And also it's worthy to mention the cyber security of the city. And nowadays in the digital city, cybersecurity is one of the key criteria for successful digitization. And the next category, projects and investments. We really have to support the innovative activity. These are investments onto the digital infrastructure, framework for investments, onto infrastructure of banks and venture funds. We haven't yet tried or tested any technological solutions, and the city may become a pilot platform for the follow-up innovations. And the solutions and exchange of ideas should be scalable. And I am in charge of these projects and being ahead of the projects of that sort. We cannot be isolated from one another, exchange some views, some practices, some ideas. Yesterday we got together with the head of best practices under the UN, and he is fully in charge of the urban development. And we decided to coordinate our activities as to the best practices exchange. And Moscow is not a recipient of best practices, but it is the city able of disseminating this practice. And everyone may confirm it. And we've been visualizing it at all the levels. And the government of Moscow City tends to say that we really have a phenomenal potential, and it has a high accessibility of electronic services, which is a part of digital process. And innovations for all, that is what we are talking about. And we are not thinking about the technological disruption alone, but talking about the innovations which will be capable of bringing the lifestyle of our citizens to a very high level. And that is not London, that is not other countries, but Moscow is Moscow. And this is the center of innovations and digital technologies. And I strongly recommend it to memorize, as not always the people get an understanding that all the processes in the city are being accelerated. And you cannot just, from the informational perspective, catch up. And now I would like to speak about some specific things. We have the international program, which is called the Open Quest. We have this targeted quest. They formulate a specific quest which is tied up to the needs of the city. We have open tender, and more than 90 companies from all over the world took part in that initiative. And it's also an innovative idea. And also, we have the central venue for that, the digital space, or the central house of entrepreneurs. So that is the central pilot venue of ours. And it makes the population aware on the new technologies. And they are the manufacturers of best products, and they are also in connection with state-owned corporations and other entities looking for innovations. And of course, we have the investors from various businesses, and this particular venue is open for the population, and they may see what is being tested there, and what is the business area for the innovations selection. If there is anybody in the audience interested in the sphere of innovations, we present them on the screen. We are looking for the organization of works in the recreational areas, energy savings, technologies for people with disability, multimedia technologies, telecommunication technologies, IoT, safety support technologies, transport technologies, medical technologies. And they really have a great expertise in those pilot projects implementation. So the key task for Moscow is to have an open venue for business and for everybody. And we Open Quest is an infrastructural program, and actually 10 solutions are selected every year and being piloted. And these are some success stories. and monitoring of pedestrians and cyclists, blockchain for preventing fraud detections in the banking sphere. Then the special equipment for cancer disease, and also the flight conducting and concrete for facades, and that is a very interesting solution. And the technologies of mixed reality and for museums, and there are quite a number of successful examples for monitoring, and we are the key platform for startups which would like to interact with the city. And we actually work together with urban departments, with the Moscow city government. We give a chance for all the systems to be tested, and we connect the Russian system with the foreign-based ecosystems and via the Agency of Innovations. And we have an umbrella organization for our startups to show their projects abroad. And we have top 20 solutions for Moscow. We have a category for an icebreaker, and in order to get the new markets, and other solutions may catch up. And it was real hard to find a top 20 from the perspective of quality and other performance characteristics. And we're talking about the solutions, the companies, and for the next year, we do project the same type of a program, and that is the exchange of views at the Moscow city level, and the representation of capitalization projects and transport projects and digital projects. And we try to align various solutions all together vis-à-vis several categories and offer them as packages for other cities and towns who would like to replicate the expertise of Moscow via trials and errors. It finally reached those successes, and it is typical of the daily life of Russia. You are invited to the Agency of Innovations. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Kirill. I would like to put a question to you. We will address the audience later. What is the success of your actions for supporting startups? And you are the consulting company to assess startup hotbeds by the number of unicorns. To what extent it reflects the actual reality? And whether the industry of startups is rapidly developing in the cities. Sometimes the Agency of Innovations take care of the growth of a unicorn. Unicorn is a unique story when you have a unique combination of technological and business competences, specific people, and we are not going to replace any business. And we see our role in a somewhat different domain. It's in the number of introduced and piloted innovations within the city. And this is the state-led innovation. And it goes from the urban level, not from the private sector. They were keen on startups and new technologies implementation. So we would like to take a lead in that particular activity and put some kind of a benchmark for investment solutions and open up a market of that sort, market for innovations. And technologically, our metropolis will become real strong. Thank you, Kirill. Kirill mentioned the keyword living lab, and we have a very interesting representative of that modern trend, smart living labs for smart innovations. So Philippe Boutillier, the General Director of Tegel Project, and Philippe will give a detailed information as to what is going on nowadays. And I would like you to discuss the following issue. So we are undergoing certain changes, and Stegel is an attempt to use the space which was originally conceived as the airport, and they took this opportunity and used this territory for educational center, for other structures, and to what extent it may affect the entire economy of Berlin. Lighthouse. Berlin is some kind of a lighthouse, which gives an impetus and vector to other cities and towns of Berlin. And probably you speak about this standalone innovations, which changes the city as a whole.
Could I have the clicker, please? So thank you very much. Yes, but I think Kirill, let's put me in a different, let's restart. There are two ways of looking at it, and everything Kirill has said is valid and true. You need certain infrastructures, you need the financing environment, you need sort of space, you need the HR element, you need, and that's probably the most important one, a curation element. You mentioned that as well, and I like that a lot. But there's more to it. I have, apart from what I'm going to show you in a minute, I've set up a few startups myself. And Berlin has by now become sort of the startup hotspot of Europe. And I would like to say that the government had nothing to do with it. It developed despite of the government. And the main reason was Berlin is a multicultural, tolerant city, very open. It was cheap to live there and find space. And we had highly qualified staff, sort of from all disciplines, basically. And those elements are much more important than any government program you could possibly conceive. So you have to make the city or the environment attractive for people to live in, so that they want to come, that the talent wants to come to your city. So it's
we already have it in Moscow.
Of course. Moscow has become a very attractive city. Sort of my last visit here was 29 years ago. I hated it. Yeah? And Moscow has developed amazingly. So, and Hila will probably say about the same about Tel Aviv in a minute, but we are coming to that, sort of the non-stop city. So I will just run through my presentation very quickly because it's much more interesting to have a discussion than to have you staring and bloody boring slides. So the Berlin case is very simple. We had major phases of transformation, sort of particularly when the wall fell down, sort of came down in '89. That stimulated an enormous transformative case because we had to combine two completely separate cities. And that was a major task. And Berlin has probably changed more than any other city in the, let's say, the old world. And the speed of change was incredible. With that, at the same time, we lost about 2/3 of our industrial base. So we had 300,000 jobs in industry, and a few years later, we had only 100,000 jobs left. And that's a problem for a city, if you don't have this industrial base. So the positive side of that is if you have a strong education sector and people don't find jobs in industry, they start their own venture. So that was what happened in Berlin. We have 4 major universities. We have more than 37 polytechs, private universities, 70 non-research institutions, more than 180,000 students. And then the city is growing like crazy, and they couldn't find jobs, so they developed this startup scene, basically. And that, of course, was perfect for the city, but again, the government had nothing to do with it. However, what the government did, it focused on the educational sector, it focused on culture, because we were strong on it, and that created a very unique and creative environment. And if you have the chance to listen to Richard Florida, who's still around and will give a talk tonight on sort of city development, I mean, he came up with the 3 T's, sort of the technology, the tolerance, and the talent, and all that applied to Berlin, and that was kind of the magic soup, if you like. So Berlin has become that ecosystem. Sort of 1/3 of all startups in Germany are based in Berlin. 2/3 of all the top startups are in Berlin. We have created more than 100,000 jobs in the startup scene now in Berlin, which is significant. So it's a success story, but again, not because of the government, because of a favorable environment. And now comes the infrastructural part. Yes, we have more than 100 co-working spaces and incubation spaces. You know, they are popping up like mushrooms everywhere. Also because the property model, sort of from a property development perspective, is quite interesting. And okay, what can I say? It's fantastic. I mean, I love my city, of course. The government is doing what they can. But now we have entered the next stage, and that is to create a global network. So we are diving into other startup hotspots. We've built the Startup Alliance, and sort of 2 weeks ago, we were in China with a delegation and opened one in Shanghai, one in Beijing. We are in Tel Aviv, of course, in Warsaw, in Paris. I mean, you see it on the slide, in Dubai, London, New York. And that's a success story. So we open up Berlin to other nations. We go and visit others. We have exchange programs, and that's working pretty good, actually. So it's all about people networks. This is my project. It's a tiny startup, the smallest I've ever done. It's about 500 hectares, 5 square kilometers in size. And about 200 hectares will be exclusively dedicated to Urbantech. We call it the Urbantech Republic. It's all about future technologies for cities. And, and it's about sort of 5% of the size of Paris, the city of Paris, or 5% of Barcelona for comparison, and in a very central location, blah, 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 all great. But more interestingly, we have focused on, when we talked about future technology, on mobility, on energy, on all the recycling stuff, on materials research, because a lot of innovation is coming from materials research, sort of new membranes, sort of battery cell technology and that stuff. And of course, IT is probably the most important layer of all. And that's something we are going to discuss in a minute, both between Tel Aviv and Moscow, because the IT sector has become so important for the whole startup scene now. So, but the most important thing, and that is something the government can do, is we have looked at hundreds of research parks around the world, and only those ones are successful that have a university at the center, an academic heart. So the first step, welcome, the first step is really to have some kind of research-focused institution or university, and then you can build the rest around it. But that's the core, really. And that's basically what we've done. So we will get a university at the center of the whole thing. They will go into the terminal buildings, and we hope that it will be a lively and wonderful space from October 2020 onwards, when the new airport will hopefully open and we can take over the premises. So far, it's only planning. So, but I'd much rather engage in a lively discussion now.
Спасибо большое, Филипп. Да, пожалуйста, Кирилл.
Well, we know very well the situation in Berlin. I produced my doctorate in Berlin about the transformation of city space and practices in Berlin on how you were able to reshape your city. It was very attractive. And I worked in an agency which was busy transforming the city environment. And among other things, we looked at Berlin experience. We were able to make Moscow equally attractive city. What you see around now, it was done thanks, among other things, to studies of Berlin experience. Now, with Andrei, we are researching. We are looking at the startup environment and will pick up the best of your practices. Not only in your environment, also will pick up the best of your startups, which is a joke, naturally. Philip, a short question. Smart district is a major trend now. Sidewalk, Google Toronto, Station F in Paris, a major project. It looks similar to Tegel project. There is smart club in Barcelona, and the trend that we observe now mean that the boundaries are becoming increasingly open, and the cities at a certain point in time start to compete for startups, for labor, for skilled labor, for educated labor. And an example which we have in front of us, the example of California, where 50% of startups are created by non-residents, people who were not born in the United States of America. Is there a need, or should there be a narrow specialization for such centers? For example, in Dubai, they are focused on blockchain. In Canada, the Canadian government decided that they would develop in the artificial intelligence area. In what area Berlin is going to concentrate your project, Tegel, for example? Well, in order to compete successfully in a narrow niche. However, the German economy is known for a strong sector of narrowly specialized companies, small-sized companies, for example, which develop automotive parts. It may be a small family firm, but will be dominating in the global market. Where are you going to focus your efforts, and are you planning to do that?
Thank you. That's a very good question, because the other point is that in order to make a place attractive, you need a very good storyline, very good narrative, and good branding.
What's your pitch?
I'll come to that in a second. And what we discovered is the big challenge we want to solve with my project, and that's of course part of the Berlin ecosystem, is sort of the big challenge of city growth. So that's why it's all about urban technologies, as I said, mobility, energy, and the rest of it. And it turned out, when we took that decision in 2012, we had no idea how well this would develop. So it was very, very fortunate, almost serendipity, if you like, sort of a stroke of luck to have focused on that sector, because now it's taking off like crazy, and everybody's talking about it. So we decided it's the future of cities. That's why we labeled that project the Urbantech Republic. Urbantech is self-evident, it's all about city technology, but also the Republic because it's for people and it's all around people. And that's where the curation part comes in. But as a city, a city is probably the most complex thing humans have ever created. And you can't look at a city in a sort of stereotypical or sort of mono-perspective way. So we have many different ecosystems now. Berlin is, interestingly, one of the cryptocurrency capitals in the world. So we have a strong and thriving scene there. We have, Frankfurt likes to believe that they are the fintech center, but we have more fintech startups in Berlin. Sort of, you know, whatever technology you look at, it's all about the human capital and the education and the talent, and they create whatever they like. So all we can do as a city is to create the perfect environment. The rest is up to them. The venture capital thing is, you know, money follows talent in that case. So the venture capital has come now, but sort of when I was setting up my startups, we had to raise capital first in London, then in New York. You know, it was virtually impossible to find anything in Berlin. So that has only developed over the last 5 years, I would say. It's comparatively new.
I'm just saying that you have the largest venture capital funds in Europe now. We recently analyzed and compared
I think they're still in London.
Europe.
They're still in London. The Brexit helps us.
No, this is not Europe anymore. So, I mean, the continental Europe. We recently analyzed the scene, and actually our conclusions, and Ray can confirm that Berlin has the huge availability of venture capital funds. Probably capital funds actually follow people, but the fact is that also you have a drastic and a terrific availability of funds.
Yes. Okay.
Спасибо, Филипп, спасибо.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Kirill. We'll come back to you to follow up on our discussion. We have a very interesting speaker today. That's Hila Oren, General Director, CEO of Tel Aviv Foundation. Hila, I cannot just but admire what is done by the mayor's team in Tel Aviv. We're great fans of what we are doing there, and the system of personal communications with inhabitants which are now building in Moscow was inspired by what Tel Aviv is doing. But today we're going to listen to a success story for which Hila was responsible personally. That's creation of an eco-innovation system, a startup system in a city. It's an interesting case how, like in Tel Aviv, it was enough to create a sufficient number of co-workings to bring about exchange of experience horizontally, and on the global map we have an innovative hub of global scale. Hila is one of the authors of the startup city concept. Hila, the floor is yours. Tell us how you managed to do all of it, and are there any recipes for the cities which are embarking on this road, which just start to support startups, and are looking at measures of support?
First of all, I'm very happy to be here, of course. It's the second time for me in Moscow. I came 6 years ago to the Urban Forum, and you did a marvelous, marvelous, marvelous job since, so congratulations to you. You know, it's never done by one person, and I was just lucky enough to work with the mayor on wrapping up the ecosystem. But let's talk about what is a smart startup city, how did we go to it, and what did we do? In the beginning, as Philip referred, you have to understand the narrative. If you want to be part of what a global city is, this picture, when I put it 7 years ago, I thought it was a dream. Tel Aviv will never be one of the 20 leading cities. Now, when I saw, Philip, you're updated, and you put Tel Aviv there, I said, am I dreaming? And why am I saying that? Not to give it as an example that we did so good. That means any city that will define its DNA, that will make sure to understand the USP of that city. That means if it's Genoa, if it's Moscow, if it's Seychelles, if it's whatever, once you understand what you're doing, where you're going, then I think the chances are better. And why am I saying that? Because it took us more than 3 years to really define that. Sometimes when a team works in a city, you feel, oh, we know everything. We're already there. These are the 66 families that were the founders of Tel Aviv 110 years ago. When they initiated Tel Aviv, we call them now the startuppers. But when they put the lottery there, they did not know that 110 years later on, this will be on Rothschild Boulevard, on every door that you'll knock, you'll find a startup. And when I'm saying that, when I worked for the city just 8 years ago, that's already 9, on 2009, that was the centennial year, I was not aware of the startup scene in Tel Aviv. And if I was not aware, that means anyone that sits here is not always aware to what is going on in his city. So serendipity is a beautiful word, and it's and a beautiful term to use and to learn from. But also each one of us has to go and analyze and work hard to find what is there. And we were lucky enough to find the Startup Nation book that was just published at the time, so we learned from there. But when we go to a city, just like Tel Aviv, I'm just taking you very quickly through the city. This is Tel Aviv, okay? We have a beautiful beach. People thought this is the DNA of the city, but it's not. It's the startup were there, and then I want to rush. Of course, you mentioned the creative class. You always have to enhance the talent, the technology, and the tolerance, but I want to come to this specific slide. To put these 5 little points, it took us more than a year. And why am I saying that? Each city needs to make its own program. Now, it's great to use consultancy. It's great to have McKinsey and BCG and whatever, and I love them all and I work with them all. But at the end of the day, it's the team, the heart of the team of the city that needs to define. Now, we understood quite early, before I think anyone, already on 2012, that we need to have free Wi-Fi all over the city. Now it's common, and now lots of cities do it. But when we did it, it was very important for us, and then it attracted. When we called ourselves a startup city, when we had startup studies in universities, again, this was published in 2011, 2012. That was quite, I would say, bold for the time. Now everybody has it, but then what it shows is that in 5 years, things change so fast. So don't be aware or afraid if you're not there, because in 5 years, everything's going to change. So you're probably going to make that change for yourself. Reduce city taxes, bring events, etc., etc. It's all about, at the end of the day, you guys as being, I think, city makers. This is the way I define myself. And it took me couple of years to understand what is my role, what is my definition, how do I define myself? Okay, I'm a CEO of a foundation, I'm a CEO of an administration, we all have beautiful titles, but at the end of the day, we need to take off red tapes, one, very, very important and very, very hard for the city, and we need to make coalitions and bring the private public sector together. Now all this, everybody talks about it. To do it, it means to come up in the morning, get into your office, get up your sleeves, and work on it day after day after day. Jerry looks to me and he knows what I'm talking about. This is what it is. It's city making. And this, I love this picture because this is the municipality hall, and that room to the right, 3 is the mayor's, and after that is mine. But the duck there is something, it's a little icon of the community of artists in Tel Aviv. And they asked to put their duck up there. Now it looks stupid, right? Why should we put the duck on the roof? It's so stupid.
Looks fun.
Exactly, I know you wouldn't. And by the way, most of the other people in Tel Aviv didn't want to put it. And I decided I'm putting $10,000 out of my budget because this is what they needed. They had 30,000 that they got by themselves, and we added 10,000 more. And it took me 2 months to make that duck to be on the roof because there was the storm regulations, and there was this and there was that. But at the end of the day, you know what this gave? It gave the whole community the feeling that the city is theirs, it's not ours. And if they can put their icon over there, first of all, the PR that we got for that, it was organic. We would never get such a PR. But this is just an example. And you're saying, what does this has to do with tech, right? With technology, with IT, with whatever. If you want your citizens to feel that they are part of the city, this is part of it. This is what we're talking about, city making. Of course, we have we've got hubs like everyone. By the way, this one is an old library, 60 years old, neglected. No one used to go there. And we took half of it and we created a co-working space, and then the rest we left the library. So what happened is the original library doubled its subscribers and doubled it in half of the meters, and the rest was hubs. And the last thing I would like to emphasize is digital. It's a card, citizen card in Tel Aviv. We are very, very small, only 420,000 residents. 80,000 already use digital. Now, what is digital? It's a card that you get information. We're very open. We're not afraid to give our information, and I know other cultures are a little bit aware of privacy.
Moscow is the same.
Oh, you have this card? Okay. So this card really pushes information to you specifically. That means if you live in one neighborhood and you've got a child 2 years old and you study in a place, you need specific information. And if I'm 80 years old and I live in a different neighborhood and I have different needs, I will get different information. And this card really is improving and improving and improving. It started 3 years ago. We won the Smart City Award in Barcelona in 2014. And again, this is a little story, but I think it tells the whole story. 2013, when I went to Smart City Barcelona, I thought it was a joke. Like, why do we need it? What is this term of smart city? But when I went there and I saw the whole world is using one term, sometimes if everybody's using something, maybe you're not that clever. join the gang. So we joined the gang and we approached next year the award, and we were lucky enough to win. I don't know how we did it. But then since that prize, everybody started coming. So sometimes it's serendipity, sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's hard work. But the most important thing is to define what is your USP, and each city has a little bit different. Tailor-made your program to what your citizens need, to what your little ecosystem of startups need, or technology, or whatever. Take off red tapes and make coalitions. When you do all that together, at the end of the day, you hear and you find success. And I don't believe yet that I'm speaking here. 2018 and 2011, I did not know what tech is.
Спасибо большое, Хилл. Кирилл хотел...
Thank you very much. Kirill wanted to contribute something. In Tel Aviv, it seems to me, I like your approach. Well, it seems very close to what we feel. The only difference with Moscow is that you had a serious startup scene, which was determined by a unique mix of atmosphere of your city that was incentivized. It was incentivized by the state, by the local problems. Our differences are more at the initial stage. The difference was not only that in that Muscovites still visit libraries, but my favorite story, I saw a road show a couple of years ago, including in Tel Aviv, where we visited about 50 of the top 200 startups. There is an element of exaggeration there. An American-looking guy, Israeli guy, with MBA from USA, gives us a presentation, looks nice, well-dressed, smart casual, etc. Better than a Londoner. And now he says, and now takes the word technological officer, a middle-aged guy in a three-piece suit with a lot of pockets. Arkady Borislev. I always recollect those jokes when I talk to our startup people. A leading startup scene in Europe is Tel Aviv, one of the leading scenes. And it was done with our emigres. But do not deceive yourself, we don't have this guy with MBA. And it's our shortfall, where we don't have an appropriate mix. We have actually the same kind of engineers that you have, but we don't have a figure of entrepreneur that will put together technical and business process are not so often found in Russia. And our main project, one of the main projects, is technograph entrepreneurship, where we start young guys, kids actually, teenagers, to become entrepreneurs. That's the difference in startup conditions. Technically, yes, we have education, we have engineers, we have interesting ideas, but in terms of entrepreneurship, how you sell it and how you make a real business of that, it's a huge research which is yet unlocked by us. Well, on top of the municipal programs which are well arranged in your city, as we understand.
Спасибо, Кирилл.
Thank you, Kirill. Hila, your greatest success is the right positioning of the city and promotion of the city at the international arena and domestically. Tel Aviv has quite a number of startups to be promoted, and it's a tourist area as well. And the city was promoting itself this way, and they are enjoying real glory. So you invested. What about the feedback? Foreigners started opening startups in Tel Aviv. It somehow revitalized your startup platform and venue. You had more investments from the foreigners. You have the world stars like in California or London. So what was the feedback?
So if I understand the question, you are asking what is the feedback from the global
результаты того,
The results of your policy. You positioned the city as one of the centers of innovations. And 10 years ago, you recognized that Tel Aviv was not visible at the global startup scene. And so what are those specific takeaways? What are the results of your activity?
So, as you said, 10 years ago we were not on the map. Now we are on the map. How is it? So it's a combination, as you said. First of all, of the people, of the young kids that are growing up in Israel. We have our army. Everybody knows that, and it gives us part of training. We have our culture, which is very open and is not afraid of failure. That means it's part of our culture to try and to fail and to try again. This is something that is not common in other cultures. And once we understood all that and we wrapped it up, we started really promoting and marketing it overseas. And then the R&D came inside. Apple, Google, Amazon, you name it, they all came to put and locate their R&D offices in Tel Aviv. Now, you could look at that, maybe some other countries or cities would look at that as stealing our minds. But because we understand that in a way we're an island, because of the geopolitical situation, Tel Aviv can be reached only by air, not by cars. Most of the countries around us are not in a peace with us. So we believe that whoever wants to join, we're opening our arms. So the flying in of ideas, of people, of money, of resources, of global corporates, for us is great. It brings challenges, because in a way we do feel that all the great and smart ideas are being stolen out, but we believe that when you're smart and you're clever, you'll be like that. I mean, we have to continue investing in our young youth. At the same time, we're trying to pull international students, international startups. We're not succeeding so well on that because we're not cheap enough, we're not competitive enough to other, and we have to work on that, okay? We're not as competitive as Berlin for international startups, I think. So we can collaborate on the R&D, but less on other things. But if you'll see where Tel Aviv was 10 years ago and where it is now, and you know, I met this young tourist last week. I like to talk all the time. This is part of the thing, to really listen and to understand what people are doing and interesting. The wow effect. People don't want to come to Israel. They're afraid of it, of what they're hearing in the news. How many here people have been to Israel, to Tel Aviv? Wow, okay, this is not usual. This is like 50%. but usually, if you just go in the street and you ask a person who wants to come to Tel Aviv, who wants to come to Israel, most of the people don't want to go. They're afraid of what they're hearing. But once they're there, the wow effect is so strong because it's so peaceful, it's so nice. It's the culture, the 24/7 non-stop city is there. So I do urge the 50% that didn't raise their hand to come. I'll host you personally.
I'd like to add something to that, because you know, my experience with the with startups in Tel Aviv and the technology scene is they have great technology but very poor marketing. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was a miracle, and it was healer in their perseverance, who managed to do great marketing for the city. I mean, it's not marketing, great marketing is not part of their culture. A Jewish friend once told me, you know, glossy brochures, I produce them only when I'm nearly bankrupt. Otherwise, I don't do it. So, and it's all about people, dedicated people. And one person can make a huge difference for a city. And that's a beautiful example.
Thank you so much.
It's true.
Интересно, что сейчас по пути Тель-Авива
And some people try to embark on the road of Tel Aviv. And France does a lot for their startups, providing PR on their startups. And Emmanuel Macron, this is the first president having 2 iPhones on his portrait. They're giving a signal that he is an American spy. And this is not the right parallel. And France prefers the Russian model. They prefer this large accelerators with the government capital. But we also have our own expertise, and we know how innovations are organized in France. But the Berlin model are closer to other models, but Paris and Moscow enjoy the same type of models. So government has an infrastructure, the government has money, and they have some systemic approach and some sections for innovations, and the government is a key procurer of these innovations. And I think that this parallel is not very appropriate. So Paris plus Moscow. And so from the perspective of our cooperation, we do cooperate with Tel Aviv and with dozens of other cities and towns. But the most interesting one is the connectivity with Paris. Typologically, we are very close by tasks, by types of activity, etc. The only difference is that we have international in Paris, a German guy is the head of it, and I am a head of my agency, being from Belarus. Я еще хотел добавить, что мы наблюдали
the amazing transformation of Moscow over the last 10 years. And Moscow has become a very attractive place now. And the thing keeping you back mostly are travel restrictions. So let's hope that the governments find a way to ease on that one. That would help tremendously for all parties involved, because you need a vibrant, open, global scene. And that's what you want to have here.
Спасибо большое. У нас организаторы просят уже немножко ускорить.
Thank you so much. The organizers was asked to speed up. Just one question and a minute for answer. How to regulate the existing startups which change to a large extent the makeup of the city? We have sharing models, aggregators, new aggregators, and we do not have to contradict Sunpins, the city regulation, and the startups could not be forced to be closed as they might not comply with the standards of the new economic model. Philippe, maybe we'll start from you.
I'm not entirely sure whether I understood the questions, but we don't regulate startups.
Да, давай вот поясню просто вопрос.
I would like to clarify it. When we have Uber, for example, it accelerated in Moscow, though it had problems in Italy and Austria. But the original model was a pro-American one, and it was hard to adjust this model and distribute responsibility for taxi. For Moscow, there were pioneers, though it was an Israeli startup located in St. Petersburg. There were some pioneers in Yandex. When Uber came, this sphere was liberalized to a large extent. And I think it's a very interesting topic to discuss. It helps various startups to play here. Uber was not disseminated in Europe, as its legal framework should have a license taxes, the system of payments, guarantees. It fits Europe better. and we do making a comparison with Uber and Yandex. There should be very strong local players who promote various spheres psychologically, and they open up certain ways for disruptive innovations for their own competitors, which may come to the market. And that happened in Moscow, and it's going to happen in other spheres when the local player will make the first step.
Нет комментариев, можем попробовать.
Kirill, thank you so much. We may put some questions from the audience. If we have another minute, you are welcome.
I want to refer to your question just in one thing. First, it's not only that we don't regulate, we do the opposite. We reduce city taxes, and there's a committee that meets every month to help startups to open their data of the municipality on smart city issues, whether it's education, data, etc. So I think we need to promote and help. This is our role, not to regulate. Sorry.
У меня вопрос к Кириллу, на самом деле.
I have a technical question to Kirill. You said that you are a proxy, some kind of an integrator, and you have this interaction with various infrastructures, but how can you integrate into the standalone initiatives, National Technological Initiative, for example? And in 2018, we had a problem named digital economy. Do you support them or integrate with them? Yes, our programs are integrated, that's right. We are guided by some specific goals set by the government, by the federal programs, and so we follow the instructions of the government and also develop some programs which may be implemented in the city. And now, jointly with Rostelecom, we present a special framework for cities and towns of Russia, and we are going to offer digitalization to these cities and towns, not necessarily of a Moscow type, but for 150,000 citizens, we may offer a special matrix, depending on the size of the city, on the parameters of the city, and this. So we do the same thing as Strelka did, and these are our real substantial initiatives. Any other questions to the speaker? If there are no further questions, let's wrap up. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. There was Kirill Ilnitsky, the Agency of Innovations, Philippe Baudet. Philippe, thank you for taking part in the speech for Moscow Technological Solutions, and Hil Oren, the General Director of Tel Aviv Fundraising. Thank you so much once again.